Well, protests have intensified in Bangladesh. Now, there are, of course, Indian establishments or Indian missions in Bangladesh that seem to be bearing the brunt of these protests, especially in Chittagong today. You know, of course, in Khulna and Rajshahi, the Indian visa application centers had to be shut yesterday. In Dhaka, the Indian visa application center had to be shut day before. And this was all because of the protests directed towards India. Now, is this a sudden eruption of anger? Is this because of the death of Sharif Osman Hadi? Well, ostensibly, it is not so, given the fact that, there is, of course, the entire process that's happening behind the scenes. And there is an effort that's ongoing behind the scenes to somehow involve India in all of this, whereas India has nothing to do with the case. Sharif Osman Hadi was shot. He was flown to Singapore for treatment. He breathed his last in hospital in Singapore. And he was, of course, someone who was going to be a candidate in the upcoming elections. But it's a matter that's an internal matter of Bangladesh. It's something that India has nothing to do with. However, there seems to be an effort behind the scenes to somehow connect this to India, to make India the villain in all of this, whereas internally the interim government in Bangladesh has failed to maintain law and order and is not, of course, making the atmosphere conducive for elections, something that India has insisted on, that hold elections in a peaceful atmosphere. So this is where it stands. Now, these protests, of course, are also taking an anti-India shape, given the fact that there seems to be the involvement, or at least Bangladesh watchers and Bangladesh observers suspect the involvement of anti-India forces. And why have these anti-India forces in Bangladesh been emboldened? Remember, the interim government said that they wanted closer ties with Pakistan. Now, within Bangladesh, also there are pro-Pakistan elements. You would remember in 1971, Bangladesh fought a liberation war, but there were certain pro-Pakistan elements that have always remained in the country. Those elements have now been emboldened, and that includes the Jamaat-e-Islami Bangladesh and its student wing, the Chhatro Shibir. Now, all of these forces want to paint India as the villain as radical Islam takes over the streets of Bangladesh, takes over the streets of Dhaka. They're burning newspaper offices. A newspaper editor was assaulted. Prothom Alo, Daily Star offices have been burnt, looted, and these are vandals who belong to groups that have links to radical Islam. Remember, the interim government freed terrorists like Jashimuddin Rahmani after coming to power, and all these anti-India forces now seem to be somehow targeting India. They are making statements about India's northeast, and of course these are people who want to create disturbance in India. And of course, given that the interim governments wants to push for closer ties with Pakistan at the cost of the historic relationship with India, these elements have been emboldened. Now, of course, they are running amok on the streets of Dhaka, and this is what's happening in Bangladesh, and that's what you see. And these protests, many believe, are going to intensify because these radical Islam forces now want to show their muscle on the ground, which is why you see people are being attacked on the streets, the press is being attacked, there is rioting, and of course, there needs to be a strict enforcement of law and order. And many also add that the interim government, while it may have announced elections in February this year, many believe that if the elections are somehow delayed, if there's a law and order issue, if there's a law and order situation and the elections are delayed, the interim government also gets to enjoy more time in power without actually facing an election. So that argument is also being made when it comes to why the interim government is not acting more strictly or reining in these elements who are running amok on the streets of Dhaka, who are harassing Bangladeshi people, who are burning down Bangladeshi property, who are attacking Bangladeshi press. So that's the question that perhaps Mohammad Yunus needs to ask, his government needs to answer, and that's what's happening in Bangladesh. And that's why this is much more than just the fallout of a shootout and a murder of a political candidate. It is something that has cross-border links. It's a larger anti-India conspiracy that's playing out on the streets of Dhaka. And one wouldn't be surprised if the visits of so many Pakistani military officials, ISI officers to Bangladesh have something to do with it. But again, that is something that only is in the realm of speculation at this point, but there is enough evidence on the ground to suggest that this is much more than just an outpouring of anger. This is something that's planned, and this is an attempt to paint India as the villain, as Bangladesh is suffering from problems that are internal. And that's the question that everyone's asking. And of course, there is a problem here that India has to deal with, because Bangladesh is in the neighborhood, and when Bangladesh or elements in Bangladesh that seemingly have the support of the establishment make statements like we will dismember the Northeast, etc., then India cannot afford to ignore it. So far, India's response has been very measured. India has advised the Yunus government to create an atmosphere that is peaceful and conducive for elections. That advice also has been rejected by Tawheed Hussain, the foreign affairs advisor equivalent to the foreign minister of Bangladesh. But all of this is very clear that there is a larger conspiracy to defame India, to vitiate the atmosphere, to generate anti-India sentiments within Bangladesh, so that this, of course, is used as a ploy to target India. And that's what's playing out on the streets of Dhaka as well, apart from what many believe is a bid to delay elections. For more such videos, stay tuned to NDTV's YouTube platform, where we go into the news beyond the headline, give you the context, and dissect every detail. Thank you so much for watching NDTV. For all the latest news reports from Bangladesh, keep watching the channel and, of course, NDTV's YouTube platform as well.